A racist cop drew his gun on me at a soldier's funeral in Arlington. Little did he know his petty prejudice was about to become humanity's first test before an alien intelligence. The air at Arlington was heavy, thick with the kind of respectful silence that only grief can command. It was a crisp October day, the kind where the autumn leaves seemed to burn with color, a final, defiant blaze of glory before the fall. It was fitting, I thought, for Sergeant Miller. He'd always been a firecracker, full of life and a fierce protective loyalty that I had come to depend on. Now he was just a name on a program, his memory carried on the wind with the mournful notes of a distant bugle. I stood ramrod straight, my dress blues feeling heavier than they ever had in my 30-plus years of service. Each medal on my chest was a story, a marker of a time and place, of sacrifices made. But today they just felt like dead weight, cold metal against the hollow ache in my chest. I was there not just as his commanding officer, but as a friend. I'd promised his mother, a stoic woman with eyes that held the same fire as her son's, that I would see him home. And so I stood, a silent sentinel near the grieving family, offering what little comfort my presence could provide as the honor guard prepared for the 21-gun salute. My staff car, a discreet black sedan, was parked a little way up the narrow cemetery road. The funeral director himself had waved me into the spot, wanting to keep the main thoroughfare clear for the caisson. It was a minor detail in a day filled with overwhelming ceremony, a logistical footnote I hadn't given a second thought. That's when I saw him. He wasn't part of the funeral detail. He was a local cop, Officer Dempsey according to his name tag. He had the swagger of a man who owned the little slice of the world he patrolled. His neck was thick, his jaw set in a permanent sneer, and his mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes but not his contempt. He was walking slowly down the line of cars, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol, less a peacekeeper and more a predator looking for prey. He stopped at my sedan. He peered in the window, then walked a slow circle around it, his boots crunching on the gravel with an obnoxious disregard for the solemnity of the occasion. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of mourners until it landed on me. Of all the people standing there in uniforms of every branch, in dark suits and black dresses, his eyes found mine. He started walking towards me, his expression hardening. I felt a familiar, weary tightening in my gut. I had seen that look countless times in my life, in briefing rooms, at checkpoints in foreign lands, and even in boardrooms back home. It was the look of a man who had already made up his mind about who I was based on the color of my skin. He stopped a few feet from me, deliberately ignoring the ranking officers from the Army and Marines standing nearby who were now watching him with curiosity. He gestured back toward my car with his thumb. "Ma'am," he said, the word dripping with a syrupy, condescending tone. "Is that your vehicle?" I kept my voice low and steady, my eyes forward, focused on the flag-draped casket. "It is, officer," I replied. "I was instructed to park there by the cemetery staff." He let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Right. The staff. You're in a restricted zone. This area is for the honor guard and family processional only. You need to move it. Now." His voice was getting louder, a blunt instrument tearing through the delicate fabric of the funeral. Sergeant Miller's young widow flinched, her small, broken sob catching in her throat. A cold, sharp anger, the kind I had learned to control and channel on the battlefield, began to smolder deep within me. I turned my head slowly, meeting his mirrored sunglasses. "Officer," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word laced with the steel of command. "We are in the middle of a funeral for a fallen American soldier. Whatever issue you have can wait." The first volley of the rifle salute cracked through the air. Crack, crack, crack. The sound was a physical blow, a punctuation mark on the finality of our loss. Dempsey didn't even flinch. He took another step closer, invading my personal space. "I don't care if the president himself is in that box," he hissed, his voice a venomous rasp meant only for me. "You people think the rules don't apply to you. I said move the car, and I'm going to need to see your license and registration." The second volley echoed. Crack, crack, crack. I held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. I had faced down warlords and insurgents with more menace in their little fingers than this man had in his entire body. But this was different. This wasn't a war zone. This was home. This was a place of honor, and he was desecrating it with his petty tyranny and ugliness. "My credentials are in the car," I said, my patience wearing dangerously thin. "And I will not be retrieving them until this ceremony is concluded and I have paid my final respects to my soldier." his face contorted into a mask of rage. "Your soldier?" he sneered, his eyes flicking down to my uniform as if seeing it for the first time, but dismissing it instantly. "You think that costume gives you a right to disobey a lawful order? I've had it with you. You're obstructing. Give me your ID now, or I'm placing you under arrest." The final volley. Crack, crack, crack. As the last echo faded, leaving a ringing silence, I made a decision. I would de-escalate. I would comply with his demand, and then I would handle him through the proper channels. My career was built on discipline. I gave him a curt nod. "Very well, officer," I said. "My identification is in my jacket pocket." I moved slowly, deliberately, my hand going to the inside of my dress blue jacket. I saw the flash of triumph in his posture. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully intimidated the black woman who dared to park in the wrong spot. But as my fingers brushed against the cool leather of my credential case, his eyes widened in a theatrical, manufactured panic. "A gun!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a terrifying false hysteria. Before I could even process the word, he was moving. The sound of his holster unsnapping was shockingly loud in the sudden, profound silence of the cemetery. The world slowed down. I saw Sergeant Miller's mother look up, her face a canvas of confusion and horror. I saw the honor guard freeze, their hands still on their rifles, and I saw the glint of steel as he drew his service pistol. The sound of the final note of taps, played by a lone bugler, hung in the air, a heartbreakingly beautiful melody of farewell. It was almost drowned out by the metallic click of the safety being disengaged on his pistol. He had it aimed directly at the 4 stars on my shoulder board, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. And in that moment, standing over the grave of one of my finest soldiers, I knew he had just made the last mistake of his life. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning like old elastic. The hole at the end of Dempsey's barrel looked like a dark, bottomless tunnel. My training, honed over decades in situations infinitely more dangerous than this, took over. My breathing slowed. My heart rate, which had flared with anger, settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. I catalogued everything. The slight tremor in his hand, the way his trigger finger was resting on the guard, not the trigger itself sloppy, but not immediately lethal. The mourners, frozen in a tableau of shock and horror. Sergeant Miller's mother, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a fresh, new kind of pain. This desecration, on top of her grief, was an unforgivable sin. My hand was still inside my jacket, my fingers resting on the smooth leather of my credential case. I didn't move a millimeter. Any sudden motion could spook him, and a spooked man with a gun is a liability I couldn't afford. "Officer, what in the goddamn hell do you think you're doing?" The voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together. It came from my left. Marine Colonel Evans, a man whose face was a roadmap of deployments from Fallujah to Kandahar, had stepped forward. He hadn't moved fast, but with a deliberate, predatory grace that was far more intimidating. He positioned himself slightly ahead of me, creating a partial shield with his own body. His eyes, chips of glacial ice, were locked on Dempsey. Dempsey's head snapped towards the colonel. "Stay back. This is official police business. The suspect is non-compliant and was reaching for a weapon." His voice was too loud, cracking with a desperate need to assert an authority that was visibly crumbling. The word suspect hung in the hallowed air, an obscenity. It was then that the others began to move, not just the colonel. 2 Army majors, a Navy captain, and the entire 7-man honor guard. They didn't rush. They flowed. They created a loose, silent semicircle, a wall of dress uniforms and barely contained fury. They didn't say a word, but their message was unequivocal. They were soldiers, and they were flanking him. He was no longer the one in control. He was the one in the trap. Dempsey's gaze darted from face to face. He saw no fear. He saw no civilians cowering. He saw discipline. He saw cold, lethal competence. He saw men who had faced down RPGs and IEDs, and who were looking at him like he was something they'd scrape off the bottom of their boot. His face, already flushed with anger, began to pale. A bead of sweat traced a path from his temple down his jaw. That's when I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Colonel Evans." The Marine's eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second. "Ma'am?" "Stand down," I commanded. "Let the officer see what he's so afraid of." The colonel hesitated for a beat, his jaw tight, but then he gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod and took a half step back, still poised to spring. The authority in my voice had been absolute, and he had responded to it instinctively. Dempsey's confusion was palpable. His eyes narrowed, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. A woman he'd dismissed as just another problem was now giving orders to a full-bird colonel who was obeying her. Very slowly, deliberately, I continued the movement I had started. My hand emerged from my jacket, holding nothing but a small, black leather case. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, showing him it was not a weapon. "You wanted my identification, Officer Dempsey," I said. My voice as cold and hard as the marble headstones that surrounded us. "You created this scene. You terrified a grieving family. You desecrated this sacred ground, and you drew a weapon on an unarmed woman at the funeral of her soldier." With each statement I took a slow, measured step towards him. He instinctively backed away, his pistol still up, but wavering now. The hunter had become the hunted. The other officers mirrored my advance, the circle tightening like a noose. "I'm going to open this case," I continued, my eyes boring into his, "and I am going to show you exactly who I am. And when I do, I want you to think about every decision you have made today that led you to this moment. I want you to understand the full magnitude of your incompetence." I was 2 feet from him now. I could smell the cheap aftershave and the fear sweating off his skin. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. His knuckles were white where he gripped his pistol. He was a cornered animal, and the most dangerous part of the encounter was now. I stopped, giving him a sliver of space, a final chance to come to his senses. The black leather case felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of my name, my rank, and the reckoning that was about to unfold. I looked from his terrified eyes down to the gun he still had pointed at my chest. Then I looked back up, a predator holding its prey in its gaze. "Are you ready to see it, officer?" I asked, my thumb finding the metal clasp. The click as I popped it open was the only sound in the world. The click of the latch echoed in the profound silence. It was a small sound, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Dempsey's eyes were glued to the black case in my hand, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The hand holding the pistol was shaking now, a visible tremor that betrayed the complete erosion of his manufactured bravado. He was a boy playing dress-up, and he had just kicked open the door to the one room he was never supposed to enter. I didn't flip the case open dramatically. I simply opened it, turned it around, and held it up for him to see. There, against the dark felt, was my identification. My photograph, stern and official. And beneath it, my name and rank, printed in stark, unambiguous lettering. General Michel Vance. Commander, United States Strategic Command. The 4 silver stars pinned below the ID seemed to catch the autumn sunlight, each one a tiny, brilliant supernova of consequence. For a moment there was nothing. No recognition. Just a blank, uncomprehending stare. He was probably struggling to reconcile the image of the woman he'd been harassing with the words printed on the card. The cognitive dissonance was a palpable force, a static crackle in the air between us. He had built a narrative in his head-arrogant black woman, probably driving her rich husband's car, thinks she's above the law, and the reality was so far outside his narrow worldview that his brain simply refused to compute it. Then I saw the shift. It started in his eyes. The ignorant fury was snuffed out, replaced by a dawning, sickening wave of comprehension. His gaze flicked from the ID, up to the 4 matching stars on my shoulder, then back to the ID. His mouth fell slightly agape. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. The pistol, which had been a symbol of his power, suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. His arms sagged, the barrel dipping towards the manicured grass. "General!" The word was a choked whisper, barely audible. He had spat the word "ma'am" at me like an insult minutes before. Now the title General was torn from him with the agony of a man realizing he has just stepped on a landmine. I didn't respond. I just held the ID steady, letting the reality of it sink in, letting it marinate in the toxic stew of his prejudice and poor judgment. I let the silence stretch, becoming its own form of pressure. All around us the other officers stood like statues, their expressions grim and unforgiving. They weren't gloating. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy of ignorance, a stain on a day already shrouded in sorrow. Finally he lowered the weapon completely, his arm falling limp at his side. He fumbled to reholster it, his hands shaking so badly it took him 2 tries. The click of the gun seating back in the plastic holster was a sound of absolute surrender. He stared at me, his mirrored sunglasses now seeming like a pathetic shield he was hiding behind. "General, I didn't know." The excuse was so weak, so utterly pathetic, that a fresh wave of ice-cold fury washed over me. You didn't know what, officer? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You didn't know that a black woman could be a 4-star general. You didn't know that the uniform I'm wearing represents 35 years of service to this country. Or did you just not care? You saw my skin before you saw my uniform. You saw a target for your aggression before you saw a fellow American mourning a fallen hero. Tell me, which was it? He stammered, his mind clearly racing for an escape route that didn't exist. No, ma'am. General. I was just... The car was parked illegally. I was doing my job. Your job? Colonel Evans stepped forward again, his voice a low, menacing rumble. Your job is to terrorize a Gold Star family in the middle of a funeral. To draw your weapon on a superior officer? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've failed at your job in every conceivable way. Dempsey flinched as if he'd been struck. His eyes darted around, looking for an ally, for anyone who would back him up. He found only a sea of cold, hard faces. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. That's when I saw the flashing lights. Far down the cemetery road, 2 more police cruisers were approaching, moving much faster than the posted speed limit. They hadn't been called by us. Someone, a groundskeeper or another mourner, must have called 911 when they saw a cop pull a gun. They screeched to a halt behind my staff car, and 2 officers jumped out, their hands on their holsters, their faces etched with alarm. They saw Dempsey, they saw the wall of military brass surrounding him, and they saw me. One of the arriving officers, a sergeant with gray at his temples and a weary look in his eyes, took in the scene. He saw Dempsey's pale, sweaty face. He saw the fury in Colonel Evans's eyes, and he saw the 4 stars on my shoulder. His entire demeanor changed. The alarm turned to dread. "What's going on here, Dempsey?" the sergeant called out, his voice tight. Before Dempsey could utter another pathetic excuse, I took charge. "Sergeant," I said, my voice ringing with command, "your officer has committed a felony. He has just assaulted a federal officer. He has brandished his weapon in a threatening manner without cause, and he has done it in one of the most sacred places in this nation, during a military funeral." I pointed a single steady finger at the disgraced cop. "I want him disarmed. I want him placed in custody, and I want his commanding officer here. 15 minutes ago." The sergeant's eyes went wide. He looked at Dempsey, who just shook his head mutely. A trapped animal. Then he looked back at me, at the 4 stars that outranked anyone in his entire state, possibly the country. He knew in that instant that this wasn't just an incident anymore. This was an international incident waiting to happen. He reached for his radio, his hand trembling almost as badly as Dempsey's had been. But as he brought the radio to his mouth to speak, a sleek black car, not a police cruiser, but a government SUV, peeled around the corner at high speed and screeched to a halt right beside us. The door flew open, and a man in a sharp suit and an earpiece practically fell out. It was my aide, Captain Milano, relation to the sergeant, a cruel irony of the day. His face was ashen. "General Vance," he gasped, rushing towards me. "We have a situation. It's the Pentagon. There's been a national security breach. We have to go. Now." The words, "national security breach," sliced through the air, instantly changing the entire dynamic. The personal, visceral confrontation with Dempsey evaporated like mist. My focus shifted in a nanosecond, the fury replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. The small-minded bigot in front of me ceased to be the mission. He was now just a tactical obstacle. "Report, Captain," I said, my voice dropping back into the clipped, precise tone of command. Captain Miller was already holding a secure tablet out to me, his other hand pressing his earpiece. He never took his eyes off mine. "Ma'am, Stratcom is on DEFCON 3. There's been an unauthorized communication uplink from a deep space satellite, the X-37B. It's broadcasting a coded message on a restricted channel, but it's not our code. The signal is being piggybacked. Someone is using our most secure asset to talk to someone else, and we have no idea who they are or what they're saying." My blood ran cold. The X-37B wasn't just a satellite. It was a ghost, a highly classified unmanned spaceplane that carried some of our most sensitive surveillance and communications technology. If someone had compromised it, they could potentially access command and control systems for our entire nuclear arsenal. DEFCON 3 was serious. It meant our forces were increasing readiness, preparing for a situation that could escalate to nuclear war in minutes. The cemetery, the grave, the grieving family, the racist coppet, all receded into the background, becoming a distant, muted scene. There was only the mission now. I looked at Dempsey, at the police sergeant who stood frozen, his hand still on his radio, at the wall of military officers who were now looking at me with a new kind of intensity. They knew. They recognized the shift. They had seen it in the field 100 times. "Colonel Evans," I barked, my eyes locking with the Marines. "You are the ranking officer here. Secure this scene. This man," I jabbed a finger at Dempsey, who flinched like he'd been shocked, "is not to leave your sight. He is to be considered a flight risk and a potential threat. Confiscate his sidearm and any communication devices. The MPs from Fort Myer will be here in 5 minutes to take him into federal custody for assault on a federal officer." "Understood." "Crystal, General," Evans growled, a grim smile touching his lips. He and 2 of the Army majors immediately stepped towards Dempsey, their movements fluid and practiced. Dempsey looked like he might protest, but one look at the colonel's face and he wilted, raising his hands in pathetic surrender. I turned to the police sergeant. "Sergeant, you and your men will secure a perimeter. No one in or out of this section of the cemetery until the MPs arrive. Give Colonel Evans your full cooperation. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the Secretary of Defense. Is that clear?" "Yes, General. Absolutely," the sergeant stammered, finally finding his voice. He immediately began barking orders into his radio, the tone one of panicked efficiency. I was already moving toward the SUV, Captain Miller at my side, the tablet in my hand displaying streams of encrypted data I was already passing. I stopped for a moment beside Sergeant Miller's mother. I took her hand. Her skin was cold. "Eleanor," I said, my voice softening for just a moment. "I am so sorry. I have to go. There is an urgent matter I must attend to." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a grief that transcended the ugly scene she'd just witnessed. She squeezed my hand. "Go, Michelle," she whispered. "Go do your job. Make sure no other mother has to stand where I'm standing." I gave her hand one last squeeze and got into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut, cocooning me in the quiet, climate-controlled interior. As the vehicle sped away, I looked out the back window. I saw Colonel Evans expertly disarming a compliant Dempsey. I saw the police officers forming a perimeter, and I saw the honor guard, their duty to the funeral concluded, standing at attention, facing me as my car departed, a final, silent salute. They weren't saluting me because I was a general. They were saluting me because in that moment, I was the one standing the watch. "What's the latest from Peterson?" I asked, my attention already fully on the tablet. Peterson Air Force Base housed the nerve center for all our space operations. "They're trying to sever the uplink, but it's ghosted. Every time they think they have a lock on the source, it reroutes through a dozen different proxies. It's sophisticated, ma'am, beyond anything we've ever seen. The NSA is calling it a digital phantom. They think it might be the Chinese or the Russians, a new form of cyber warfare." My mind was racing through contingencies, through protocols and response packages. Who had the capability? Who had the motive? Poking the bear that was U.S. Strategic Command was tantamount to suicide. It had to be a state actor, someone with immense resources. As the SUV swerved onto the highway, a secure video call blinked to life on the tablet's screen. It was the face of General Markinson, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his expression dire. "Michelle, thank God," he said, skipping all pleasantries. "We have a massive problem. The X-37B isn't just broadcasting, it's retasking. It just maneuvered into a new orbital path without our command." "Retasking to where, Mark?" I demanded. "We don't know. The trajectory is impossible. It's accelerating towards a Lagrange point. There's nothing there. It's just an empty spot in space." He paused, rubbing his weary eyes. "And Michelle, the message it's broadcasting, our cryptographers just broke a piece of it. It's not a data stream, it's a welcome message." "A welcome message? For who?" The implications were staggering. Was it a signal for a sleeper weapon? A prearranged communication with a hidden asset? "We don't know," Markinson said, his voice grim. "But 15 minutes ago, every deep space listening array we have, from Arecibo to the VLA, detected an object. It just appeared out of nowhere, beyond the orbit of Neptune. It's massive, bigger than any asteroid we've ever tracked, and it's moving towards Earth at an impossible speed, decelerating as it comes. It will be in Earth's orbit in less than 72 hours. He took a deep breath, and the next words he said sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock through my entire being. "And Michelle, it's not from here." The chairman's words hung in the air, heavier than any artillery shell. "It's not from here." The phrase detonated in my mind, rearranging the entire strategic landscape of the planet in a single, terrifying instant. Russian cyber attacks, Chinese espionage. All of it felt like children's games now. This was a first contact scenario. The kind of existential crisis you game out in sterile war rooms but never ever believe you'll face. My mind, trained for decades to anticipate the actions of human adversaries, was now forced to grapple with the unknown. 72 hours, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. What's its profile, Mark? Energy signatures? Communications? Nothing, he said, his face a grim mask on the screen. It's completely dark. No emissions of any kind. It's either the stealthiest thing ever built, or it's just coasting. The only reason we see it is because it's blocking the stars behind it. The X-37B is the only thing it seems to be talking to, and our bird is actively welcoming it into our house. The irony was crushing. While I was facing down a small-minded man consumed by terrestrial hatred, a potential extinction-level event was barreling towards us from the void. Dempsey's prejudice was a cancer, but this was an asteroid. "Get me a direct link to the White House Situation Room," I ordered Captain Miller, "and get me everything we have on the X-37B's payload. Everything. Even the programs so black they don't have names." For the next 2 days, I lived in the pressurized, windowless world of Stratcom's command bunker, deep beneath Offutt Air Force Base. Time blurred into a continuous cycle of threat assessments, satellite data, and frantic video conferences with world leaders. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a cold, terrifying sense of purpose. The object, now designated Lancer, continued its silent, inexorable approach. On every screen, its trajectory was a clean, perfect arc, aimed directly at a geosynchronous orbit over North America. The X-37B had maneuvered to meet it, a tiny metal Judas. The Dempsey situation had been dealt with swiftly. Colonel Evans had filed a report so scathing and detailed it read like a legal indictment. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a dozen high-ranking military witnesses, Officer Dempsey was immediately suspended without pay. Federal charges were filed. His career was over. His union, after seeing the body cam footage, which had captured everything from his initial sneer to the moment he drew his weapon, dropped him like a hot rock. It was a footnote, a minor skirmish that had preceded the real war. But it stayed with me. The memory of his blind hatred was a stark reminder of what we were fighting for, the idea that we could be better, that the uniform and the ideals it represented meant something more than the prejudices of the person wearing it. On the final day, with Lancer just hours away, we found it. Buried in a subcontract for the X-37B's guidance system was a piece of alien code. Not alien as in foreign, but alien as in not human. It had been dormant for years, a digital sleeper cell left behind by a probe that had crashed in the Roswell Desert decades ago. The probe's technology was reverse-engineered, its secrets woven into the fabric of our own advancements. We thought we had controlled it, but we hadn't. We just installed a cosmic doorbell. The X-37B wasn't compromised. It was activating. It was calling its masters home. And the welcome message it was broadcasting was a status report on our technological and social development, including our global network, our military capabilities, and our capacity for self-destruction. Lancer arrived precisely on schedule. It stopped dead in its designated orbit, a monolithic silhouette against the stars. And then it spoke. It didn't use radio waves. It sent a single resonant pulse of directed energy that vibrated through the very fabric of our communication systems. The message appeared on every screen in the command bunker, translated by the very code it had planted in our systems. "We have observed your development. Your species shows great potential, but is plagued by a primal, self-destructive conflict. You turn on your own for differences in pigment and belief. You build weapons capable of sterilizing your world. We have come to make a determination. Prove to us you are worthy of the stars, or we will prune the branch before your sickness spreads." It was an ultimatum. A test. We were a planet on probation. In the suffocating silence of the bunker, surrounded by the most powerful military minds on Earth, I looked at the faces of my fellow generals. I saw fear, yes, but I also saw determination. And in that moment, I thought of Sergeant Miller's funeral. I thought of the quiet dignity of his mother, the steadfast loyalty of Colonel Evans, the unified wall of soldiers standing against a single act of hatred. I thought of how, in the face of ugliness, they had come together, not with violence, but with an unshakable moral certainty. I keyed my microphone, connecting me to the President and the National Security Council in the White House. "Mr. President," I began, my voice clear and steady. "They say they've been observing us. That means they've seen everything. Our wars, our hatred, our division. They saw what happened at Arlington. They see it all as a single damning data point, primal, self-destructive conflict. We can't fight them. We can't hide from them. All we can do is show them they're wrong. We have to show them the other side of the data. My plan was simple. It was desperate. It was perhaps insane. We would not power up our weapons. We would not aim our missiles. We would turn every satellite, every telescope, every camera we had away from them and point them back at ourselves. We would broadcast a single, unencrypted global transmission, not of our leaders or our armies, but of our people, of doctors saving lives in war-torn countries, of volunteers rebuilding homes after a hurricane, of children of all races playing together in a schoolyard, of the honor guard meticulously folding the flag at Sergeant Miller's grave. We would show them the millions of daily acts of love, sacrifice, and decency that defined our species far more than the hatred of a few. We would show them the quiet courage of Eleanor Miller, the unwavering integrity of Colonel Evans. We would show them that for every Dempsey there were 1,000 Sergeant Millers. For 6 hours we broadcast our soul to the stars. We held up a mirror to ourselves for an alien audience to judge. The monolithic ship remained silent, a dark god in the sky. Then, as the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, a new message appeared. Your capacity for compassion is as great as your capacity for destruction. It is this balance that will determine your future. We will continue to observe. And then, as silently as it arrived, Lancer was gone. It didn't accelerate, it just vanished from our scopes. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the bunker, a sound of a species being granted a second chance. Weeks later, life had found a new, more fragile normal. I stood once more at Sergeant Miller's grave, this time alone. The autumn leaves were gone, and a light dusting of snow covered the ground. It was quiet, peaceful. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor Miller. A local news article was attached. The headline read, "Disgraced Officer Volunteers for Community Outreach in Impoverished Neighborhoods." The article detailed how a newly civilian James Dempsey, as part of his plea deal to avoid federal prison, was now working at a youth center, mentored by a black pastor. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a start. It was a single data point of change. Looking up at the clear winter sky, at the infinite expanse where our judges were still watching, I felt a flicker of hope. The universe was vast and full of wonders and terrors, but the most difficult battles, the ones that truly defined us, were not fought against aliens in the cold darkness of space. They were fought here, on the ground, in the messy, complicated, and ultimately hopeful terrain of the human heart. And that was a war we could and must win.